Welcome, everybody. We'll get started. I know some people are still outside, getting some food probably, but in the interest of time, we'll get started here. As Aileen introduced this session, this is a special session that we organized in honor of Lynn Usery, who unfortunately passed away a few months ago. We had an idea that we should have a session here, and then Angela and Marguerite and Aileen helped us out here. What we did was we picked three papers that have a direct connection to Lynn. So Barry and I have papers related to sieges, which Lynn led for a long time. So that was the rationale for picking two papers. And then, of course, Lynn was working so much on map projections. So we picked Fritz and Sarah's paper on map projections. So all three papers have at least a personal connection with Lynn. So what we did was we allocated the first paper session to Sam, who worked very closely with Lynn for a long time. And so she's going to begin this session with a very personal description of what it was to work with Lynn. And so without much ado, I just hand over the stage to her. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Good morning, everybody. I know it seems like it's after lunchtime, but it's not. It's still morning. I have the great pleasure of being the person who gets to speak on this, although there are many others. I need to speak louder. There are many others who came before me and who probably would be more appropriate, but the task falls to me, and so I'm going to make the most of it. By starting, first of all, with this most audacious slide. When I sat down to develop the presentation, this is the first thing that popped into my head was CGIS, for me, was the greatest place on Earth to work, and still is. And it is because of Lynn Usery. You can't hear me. Sounds loud. Is that better? Yeah. I'm not very good at holding these things. So there have been lots of memorials to Lynn that we've read online and we've heard. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to give you an insider's view as to what it was to work with Lynn. I would say on a daily basis, but he traveled so much that was never possible. But to work with him as a research scientist, and I've gotten input from other of our group, just to give you an idea of what it was like. So while CGIS may not be the greatest place on Earth for everyone to work, I believe it is for us. So this is CGIS's honor to Lynn. So Lynn, as probably everyone knows, was very instrumental, in fact, was probably the driving force behind CGIS, Center of Excellence for Geospatial Information Science. And Mike Finn was with him from the beginning, before CGIS became what it was. And so I've asked Mike and others to provide a quip, and forgive me, but I'm going to read this aloud because it is a lot of text and you may not be able to read it. Mike says, as a mentor, he was readily available. He was patient, he was helpful, he was encouraging, he was humble, never condescending in any fashion or at any time. He was fun to work with, and he challenged me, in appropriate ways that were not necessarily obvious. He was willing to give me a chance to go where I always felt and hoped my career was headed, to a more true research environment for my more general scientific research and development past. He gave me that chance and he showed me the ropes, taught me more than I ever thought I needed to know. For this, I will be forever grateful. He was a good friend. I miss him. And as an aside, he allowed me to provide my point of view and occasionally rant when I needed to. He wasn't offended by my ranting. He realized it was never personal. That too was part of my growth. It showed his patience and wisdom in this regard. I feel it was a reflection of his outstanding leadership. And there's a picture of Mike, who is in the audience, and Lynn. Dahlia. Dahlia Veronca is a research scientist with CGIS. Has worked very closely with him on their ontology work and knowledge base. Dahlia says, Lynn's service to his country started and ended with topographical mapping. He created systems to publish free data that fueled GIS in the United States and was working on geospatial ontology that will fuel the next boom in knowledge graphs. Lynn's first career choice was to be a nuclear submarine officer. In fact, he was interviewed by Jimmy Carter, yet Lynn chose to work with us on domestic cartography instead. Thank you, Dahlia. Barbara Poor joined CGIS after Dahlia. Talking to Barbara was fun. She's now a research scientist emeritus because she's retired, obviously. And so when I got this quote from her, I tried to imagine her as a crazy humanities nut. She says, Lynn's great strength as a scholar and a mentor was that he listened to other points of view. I was a crazy humanities nut who felt that the user's viewpoint was critical to cartography. I proposed user-centered design using the methods of the arts and the social sciences to improve digital mapping practices. Lynn supported me all the way, and I will be forever grateful for that. Thank you, Barbara. Larry Stanislavski is a current research scientist with CGIS and has also been in the group for a very long time. I probably shouldn't say that, for a long time. We don't want to sound like we're an aging workforce. So Larry shared this with me. He says, Lynn was always very enthusiastic about the Center of Excellence for Geospatial Information Science. He was usually on travel, but when he returned, he was excited to talk about his efforts to expand the role of CGIS. On a more personal note, I enjoyed learning about Lynn's younger years, such as that he rode a motorcycle and he worked on construction projects in Florida. Lynn talked about these earlier days as he regularly helped me fill my truck with firewood that we cut up at his home farm in Missouri. Lynn had this sign at the entrance of his home farm. And in case you can't read it, it says, Walter's Rest, Eddie Lynn Usury, owner. This is a working farm and home. No trespassing violators will be shot. Survivors will be shot again. Early in Mike Speak was our CGIS supervisor pretty much all of the history of CGIS up until he retired about 3 years ago. So he worked with Lynn a lot. The two, in the federal government, your research scientists have to have an administrative supervisor. And Lynn did not want to be a supervisor. He wanted to be the research director, which he was. So the two worked together to do the admin stuff. And Mike, if anybody knows Mike Speak, is hilarious and had a very full career at the USGS, retired 5 years ago? Anyway, so Mike sent me this. He said, early in my career at the USGS, as part of my cartographer development program, I was working with Lynn during my rotation through research. At this time, I was also working on my master's degree at the local university. Lynn was an adjunct professor there and agreed to teach a special projects course in photogrammetry. Turns out I was the only person in the class. It also turns out that it was the hardest course in my graduate program. I thought I might get a break because it was one-on-one and we knew each other. But of course, that was not Lynn. However, I was able to use the final project from this course as the beginning of the final project for my CDP. As I was preparing for my presentation to the entire management team, I was obviously nervous. Lynn said this to me, don't worry, your research is beyond the understanding of most of the people in this room. You won't have a problem. And he gave me his reassuring smile. I did fine. Thanks to Mike for that. Tom Schoberg, also research scientist emeritus, was not with us long in CGIS, but had an impact. And apparently Lynn had an impact on him. He says, the thing that I feel separates the giant from the mere mortal scientist is not so much technical expertise, a spookily thorough command of the literature, and an irrepressible drive to understand some part of the universe, although those are all necessary. But the true giant in the field has a seemingly unnatural intuition or feel on where the discipline is going and what the important questions that need to be asked are in order to get there. Lynn had this power. Yet at the same time, he had no arrogance in his demeanor. Rather, his kindness may be one of the things that made him great. It was an incredible honor to work for him. Thanks, Tom. We have a new equipment development research scientist, Phil Thiem. And I talked with Phil and he said, you know, I really did not get to work with him very much before he passed. He said, these are my two impressions, which if you know Phil, he's very short and to the point. And they kind of define Lynn. He was easy to work with and very personable. He was quite insistent in letting us be independent. So as a research scientist inside CGIS, that was the greatest gift that he gave us, was to promote and protect our independence at all times, and to encourage us to think forward and to grow. So I'm last here, and I wanted to just be a little bit less formal and talk about a couple of things I remember. I came to the USGS from academia. I was an associate professor at NAU and Flag. High teaching department. I didn't have much time for research, so I was thrilled to come to the USGS. And seeing Lynn walk around the building is always such a treat because he's such a striking figure. But it didn't take me long to realize that he was actually pretty approachable. And we got to talking and working together more often. And he really gave me an appreciation for the historical topographic map. And I would sit in his office and we would talk about the processes, the rules that changed over time, the number of people, 300 people on average put their hands on a single quad. And this really, he and I had this as a common interest and spurred my interest in the historical topographic map. We discussed how things had changed over time and that our new product, the US Topo, the digital version, how we could continue to grow that product to capture information that's in that historical map that we don't want to lose. It in many senses, it's a record that we don't have any other record for. When traveling with Lynn, that was always fun. He, enjoyed his Coke, Coca-Cola, sorry, and his Mars bars. And we had in common, well, Lynn was an avid reader, probably everyone knows that, read everything, but he was a sci-fi fan, which I am also. And we would play this game while we were driving to the airport from Rolla, that's an hour-and-a-half drive, where we would come up with a space opera that the other person had to come up with a new ending for. And I remember the first time we did this, and I said, Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama. He gave me 5 plausible, interesting endings to that book that right off the top of his head that inspired me. And now looking back, I wish I'd written them down. Every time we did this, I should have written them down, but I was always so impressed at how quickly he could think and his vision, because those are the big, big operas about where we're going as a society. Lynn believed in science. He always sheltered us inside CGIS from, the big administrative wheel of the federal government. Always encouraged us to think forward, but to also follow our dreams, as wacky as they may be. I've been working on delineating landforms of the US, and particularly the named landforms. When you look at the named landforms, they're more cognitive than numerical. And I don't know how many times I walked down, I passed this office on my way to the bathroom, and I would just stop in. I never knocked on the door and asked to come in, that he turned me away. And I would sit there and say, Lynn, I don't think it can be done. And he would say, it might not be, but we're going to keep trying. That was the kind of visionary support that he gave us always. And I don't think he even thought about it. I think it just came naturally to him. So in closing, I want to say that to be able to walk a few meters to Lynn's office, to sit in person with him and brainstorm ideas, was a privilege that I may have taken for granted. I wish I had done it more often. His knowledge of our work and enormous capacity for envisioning the future will be hugely missed. Thank you very much.
I don't feel like we should moderate this like a normal session, so I want to know if there's anybody else who wants to say anything about Lynn. Would you want to do it? We can control the session, paper timings later. Just go ahead and speak if you want to. I can bring the mic to you. Oh, he has a mic. Anybody wants to add to what Sam expressed? Doesn't have to be from CGIS.
No, I'm Tim Trainer from ICA and formerly from the Census Bureau. I've known Lynn for a long time. We had lots of collaborations between the two agencies. He was just such an interesting person and worked so hard. I don't know them the same way that the folks that worked with him in CGIS did, in working with him day to day. I can imagine it was just a real joy. But I would say from the ICA community, he was thoroughly dedicated to advancing the subject matter that we had for both cartography and GI science. I know his days in UCGIS, for example, he would reach out and try to get other people engaged. So he was always looking for opportunities to share and to continue the science and to continue the advancement. So I just have warm reflections, and I think he made a big difference. Thanks.
Thank you. I also want to remind people that he actually was a professor at UGA, right? I just remembered. Angela, would you want to say something about it? Because you seem to be at his workplace as well. I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot, but.
Yes. Lynn was a professor at UGA before I joined. I think after I joined the department, he continued to be there for probably 3 more years. But my impression is really very consistent with the general impression here. He was a great professor, great colleague. He treated junior professors, graduate students as equals, never condescending, and always tried to help. So I think he's just a great role model that inspires all of us. Thank you.
All right, I guess we'll move to the next presentation. Oh, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I knew Lynn as well as many of you did, but I knew him from, I don't know, probably 10 years at least. And I remember sitting in my office one day, and one thing that hasn't been mentioned is Lynn had a passion for Civil War, and went into that community in the reenactment community. So so he had this whole other dimension that's how he relaxed, and he really liked that. And I was just amazed at what he was talking about, the level of detail and commitment to realism they had in the replication of Civil War reenactment.
All right, I guess I should let Barry continue the session with his presentation. Sorry, are they online? Oh, sorry, I forgot. Go ahead. So, oh, David DiBiase, yeah, go ahead. How do we do this?
Oh, thank you for making time. I just wanted to reflect ever so briefly on the time that Lynn Nursery was a professor at the University of Wisconsin. I was a graduate student at the time, and David Woodward, my advisor, and I went to the airport to meet Lynn when he came to visit for his interview. He was dressed all in black and looked like a cross between Johnny Cash and Duane Allman. And we walked right by him, not thinking that this could possibly be a candidate for, and in fact, the first GIS professor at the University of Wisconsin. But we finally did meet up with him, and I got to serve as his TA in his first GIS class at Wisconsin. He was a very kind and wise man.
Thank you. Marguerite?
Hi, thank you. I'll be brief. I just wanted to say that I overlapped with him and also my colleague, Tommy Jordan, and also Lynn and I had, and all three of us, Tommy, had the same major advisor, Dr. Roy Welch at UGA. So I was able to know him as a student, and then he went away and he came back. So as a colleague in geography, we had an amazing trip to Siberia in 1995. We taught a workshop there, and I can tell you some stories about Lynn Ursary, but I won't right now. We came back and I was showing my husband the pictures, and he said, "Oh, that guy, he was my roommate in 1972." So just lots of connections, and then also in ASPRS. So he was a former president of the American Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, and Tommy and I were also presidents, and all three of us, as Roy's students, followed him as president of ASBRS. So he really gave a lot of his time and his knowledge to professional societies. And just very quickly, after he passed, I had many students contact me that said they met him at conferences. He sat down with them, he asked them what they were doing, and he was just generous with his time and interest in what they were doing. So amazing person to witness. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful, I think. Aileen?
The story by, who just said it? That there were, David DiBiase. I'm like looking around for who said it. The story by David reminds me of how I met Lynn for the first time. I was a pissant master student at Indiana University, and we didn't have a GIS program. We didn't have, well, we had a very nascent GIS program, and I wanted to study cartography and GIS. So I used the Association of American Geographers Visiting Geographical Scientist funds to bring Lynn down from University of Wisconsin-Madison to Indiana University. And he, as many people have said, he just didn't discriminate against me because I was young, I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't know what I was talking about. He just always, in my entire interactions with him, he always treated me like an equal. And I don't know, Alan, do you remember that I also brought you to, that's how I first met you. I brought him on those AAG Visiting Geographical Scientist funds to I don't even remember, Oregon State University. And, but Lynn, I just can't say enough about the impact he had on my life, and I'm hearing that he's had the same kind of impact on other people's lives. So bless you, Lynn.
Thank you.